Hi, this is Matthew from NerdNewsToday.com. I'm here now at the Dark Horse booth at New York Comic Con 2016 with Vivek Tiwary. Vivek, how are you today, sir?
I'm great, thanks.
Now we're here today to talk about your graphic novel, The Fifth Beatle.
Yes,
so tell us a quick synopsis about what this book is about.
Yeah, so The Fifth Beatle is a graphic novel based on the life of Brian Epstein. Brian was a kid, he was 26 years old, who discovered the Beatles when they were playing basement clubs. They were totally unprofessional, drinking on stage, smoking on stage, goofing around with the audience. He cleans them up, he gave them their suits, their haircuts. He convinced George Martin to sign and produce the band when every record producer and record label in the UK had already passed on them. He convinces Ed Sullivan to book the band in the US when a British band had never made an impact in the United States. He is literally the guy who, behind the scenes, engineered Beatlemania and brought the world the Beatles, which in itself is a fascinating Beatles story and a largely untold Beatles story, an origin story, to put it in comic book terms. But he also accomplishes all this while he's gay and Jewish and from Liverpool. And in the 1960s, those are three tremendous obstacles. It's a felony to be gay, anti-Semitism is prevalent in the country, and Liverpool, prior to the Beatles, is a port town without any cultural significance whatsoever. So while it's a great Beatles story, it's also an underdog story. It's an inspiring human story about a guy who chased his dreams. I always say that if there's one message to this graphic novel and to the Fifth Beatle, it's that no dream is too impossible and no person too unlikely to realize that dream. And so that's probably not that brief, but that's what the book is all about. So
it is a very surprisingly personal story, because when I first saw this, I was like, what's Fifth Beatle? Yeah. And then you're reading about it. It's about the Beatles. It's about this man who's going through all these different tribulations. It's a very personal story. It's a very challenging read as well in a lot of ways, just because of what the journey he has to go through is. So tell us about a little bit more about that journey and how you were able to do the research for this and really put this encompassing book together, because this covers decades of what's going on.
Yeah, so thank you for asking that question. It really is a personal story and a true labor of love for me. So I came to the Brian Epstein story when I was in business school. I'm of Indian origin. I was born in New York, but as a young person of Indian origin, I was expected to either become a doctor or an engineer or join my family business, which would have seen me selling financial products and food products and financial products. And that's what I was on track to do. I was at the Wharton School of Business, dreaming about working in the arts, because that's what I was passionate about. Now, Wharton in 1991 didn't have any resources for young people who were interested in the arts. That's changed, but that was the deal back then. So being a lifelong Beatles fan, I thought, I need to study this stuff on my own if this is what I want to do with my life. So I should study the life of Brian Epstein, the guy that basically did all those things for the Beatles that I mentioned earlier. So I began this study on my own. Now, 1991, there's no Wikipedia, there's no YouTube, there's no Google. There are none of these online resources we so take for granted. And there's no books about Brian Epstein. To date, The Fifth Beatle is the only book, graphic novel or otherwise, that's in print about Brian. So really, and you asked about research, I had no choice but to do interviews. I basically read every Beatles book I could find, and I painted a picture in my head of the people who knew Brian well, and then I cold called them. People like Sid Bernstein, the legendary concert promoter who brought the Beatles over to the US for the first time, Nat Weiss, who was the Beatles' US attorney and became Brian's best friend and closest confidant. And I literally just called them up and I said, I'm a young person who's looking to learn more about Brian. The little bit I know is inspiring, and will you talk to me? And not one of them turned me down. And I chose people at first who lived either in New York or in Philadelphia or within driving distance. I was at school in Philly and I was from New York, so they were people that I could drive to and I could sit down with and get to know personally. So a lot of them became friends. And what happened was, over the course of many years, they told me all the Beatles stories and the business stories that I was chasing, but I also slowly learned the personal side of Brian's life and all those personal obstacles that he overcame. And that's what really struck a deep chord for me. I was somebody that was expected, as I said, to become a doctor or an engineer or go into traditional business. I wasn't supposed to write comic books, and I produced Broadway musicals, and that was crazy for somebody like me. But the Brian Epstein story told me that it wasn't crazy. I was like, if the gay Jewish kid from Liverpool could find the Beatles, why couldn't the weirdo Indian kid from New York City write comic books and produce Broadway musicals? So the journey for me is incredibly personal, and the process was personal. It involved sitting down with Brian's friends and colleagues and clients and enemies, some people who didn't like Brian, and really getting those personal stories, and that's how this book was created. So really, in every way, shape, and form, it's a labor of love by the strictest definition.
I'm definitely glad you chose to do this and not anything else.
Thank you.
It's a wonderful book, and another thing I really love about the book as well is the artwork in here. And I love how the story is really intertwined. There's segments of reality that we intertwine to things like the Ed Sullivan Show, and then other things that are happening with the Beatles. I really enjoy that. So I'd like to ask a little about the artwork, like what kind of input you had in the artwork and weaving that graphical part of the story, because it's very captivating. Just look at the pages, not even know much about the Beatles.
So I was blessed to work with two amazing artists. Andrew C. Robinson and Kyle Baker are two artists who are at the top of their game. They've worked on a tremendous amount of big titles in the comic industry. And The Fifth Beatle was my first graphic novel. I've been reading comics ever since I was a kid, and I was definitely one of those geeky kids that bought all the special editions that had the scripts in them, so I would compare the script to the panels.
One of us.
So that totally. I mean, my earliest memories of reading are sitting on my mom's lap reading Tintin books. So I often say I learned to read by reading comics. I'm a huge comics geek. And so even though I hadn't written a graphic novel, I was familiar with the medium and scripts and how they were created. So my script was an odd beast. It had certain sequences and pages that were very descriptive. I knew exactly how I wanted it. I knew I wanted this number of panels and these camera angles and this sort of shading and this lighting design and whatnot. And so I was able to very specifically say what I wanted. And then there were other sequences where I knew the dialogue and I knew what the characters were emotionally going through, but I had no idea how to block it or how to tell it in art. And so I really relied on Andrew and Kyle to be a bit of both, to when I knew exactly what I wanted, to be able to give me exactly what I wanted. And look, those guys are pros, they're not automatons. So sometimes they would come back and say, I know what you want, but I think this might work better. And they were, more often than not, they were right. So that part was often collaborative. But then there were entire sequences when I was like, Andrew, Kyle, you know how to do this. You tell me, how do we do this sequence? So it was really a bit of both. I have to say, creatively working with those guys was a wonderful collaboration in where I had input in the art, to answer your question, but there were moments where I had no input because I had no idea. I was like, you guys you know what to do, you take it and run with it. And then, but they both agreed to do this because they loved my script and they loved the story. So there were some sequences where it really wasn't entirely my vision, and they gave me what I asked for. So there were moments of both, But again, I can't emphasize enough how lucky I was to work with two absolutely incredible artists. I know it's disingenuous to say that I'm a fan of my own work. That probably sounds a little self-serving, but I have to say, just as a comics fan, I flip through this book and I see the artwork that Kyle and Andrew did, and I'm just a fan. I think they did breathtaking work.
I agree completely. It's very, I want to say theatrical as well in some ways. A lot of the staging of how you put the characters is very theatrical, but also feels very cinematic with how angles are chosen, camera angles, colors, choices. It's a really amazing book. And I think cinematography is a great word to use here, because you have some news as well about what's going to be happening with the future of the Fifth Beatle.
Yeah, totally. So we are adapting it for the screen. We're adapting it for television. So it's going to be a TV event series. The plan is 6 one-hour episodes, so it'll have a 6-hour arc. We've done a deal with a company called Sonar Entertainment, who are a financier and producer of television. They're amazing. And I'm writing the episodes myself. I just finished the pilot script, and we're out to directors right now. By the end of the year, we hope to announce our director and key cast, with network choice to follow that pretty shortly afterwards. And I probably should have started by saying the most exciting thing about the television series is we have the approval of the Beatles and access to Beatles music. So Paul, Ringo, Yoko Ono, and Olivia Harrison all signed off on it, which allowed us to do a deal with Sony ATV, who control the music publishing, which is a long-winded way of saying there's going to be a ton of Beatles music in the television show. It's an unprecedented deal. They've never approved a project about their history before. So it's a great honor and a great responsibility, but we're up for the challenge. And as I said earlier, it's a real labor of love for us. So very excited about that. And if anyone in the audience is interested in getting the breaking news of when we can announce director and cast, please join our mailing list. We're at fifthbeatle.com. We're also on Facebook at The Fifth Beatle, and we're on Twitter at Fifth Beatle. And as I said, in the coming months, we should be making an announcement on director, cast, and network. So it's an incredibly exciting time for us. I've been starting to read the pilot script at comic conventions. I'm not reading it here at New York.
We totally steal that and look at it.
But I did read it at Baltimore, and if you keep an eye on fifthbeatle.com on the appearances page, you'll be able to see when next I'll be doing a script reading. So I like to do a lot of that. So yeah, it's a really exciting time for us.
So you said before this was your first graphic novel. It's now going to potentially become a TV miniseries. It's on the way to big, big things. This has got to be incredibly overwhelming for you.
It is, but you know, when you work in projects that you love, it doesn't feel so overwhelming as it just feels dreamy. You know, it feels like it's a dream come true every day, and I don't take that for granted. I feel very, very lucky to be doing what I've been doing, working with people that I love, working with a company like Dark Horse that's been amazing, Sonar at television. I'm a very lucky guy, and I really don't take that for granted. But you know, it's I also think of myself as a storyteller. You know, it is my first graphic novel, but I've been producing on Broadway for a number of years. I produced Green Day's American Idiot. I produced The Addams Family. I'm currently working with Alanis Morissette to adapt Jagged Little Pill for the stage. And I really think of all of this as just storytelling. You know, when I decided I wanted to tell the Brian Epstein story, it's like, what medium makes sense for that? And to me, it was comics and television made the most sense for the Brian Epstein story. And so, you know, even though I hadn't done comics before, I feel like I've been storytelling for a number of years, and to me it doesn't feel, you know, people say that all the time. They're like, is it a dramatic shift all of a sudden you're doing comics? And I'm like, no, I feel like what we do, we're storytellers, and it's about finding the medium that makes the best sense for the story. And as I said, I'm a comic geek, so I've been dying to do this since I was a little kid, so it didn't feel as strange a shift as it might seem, you know.
All right, great. So for anybody out there, fifthbeatle.com.
Yeah.
And if you want to follow Vivek on Twitter or social media, the triple threat that is theater, comics, and TV now, how do we follow you?
Yeah, so I'm at Vivek J. Tiwary. That's Vivek, middle initial J, Tiwary, Vivek J. Tiwary on Twitter, and I'm on Facebook. And the book is coming out on Tuesday in paperback, so we're very, very excited about that. And if I can quickly show you, we've got the trade paperback has some new bonus material section. As I mentioned, you know, you were talking about the wonderful artwork and the cinematography that Andrew and Kyle brought to their work. So Andrew has a bonus material section of early character designs and his work on the Fifth Beatle designing the cover. You get to see how a pencil sketch like that winded up turning into to that, which I think is just so wonderful to see that artistic process, how pencils like that can wind up becoming that. It's just gorgeous stuff. And then Kyle Baker has an art gallery together of Brian Epstein work that he had been designing for his section, early cartoons that he mimicked after the Help album cover, and the Sgt. Pepper's album cover. And then I put some new material, some essays. I did a TED Talk on the Fifth Beatle, and I was lucky enough to work on the induction of Brian Epstein into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which happened after the first printing of the book, but before this recent printing. So I wrote an essay about my experiences working on that induction, and I put a little memorabilia gallery together at the back, a Christmas card that Brian sent his mailing list, an early Cavern Club poster when Pete Best is still in the band, and one of Brian's business cards. So the paperback, I'm really excited about it because it has all these cool bonus materials. We're launching it really at New York Comic Con this weekend. And the other thing that I want to quickly mention that we're launching is a playlist, an album, a soundtrack to the Fifth Beatle. And it's exactly as described. It's 16 songs. The songs go with the book, and because we're doing a TV series with music, the songs also give you a sneak peek into what the television show will sound like. So it's the soundtrack for both the book and the show, and it's free. It's a Spotify playlist. If you go to darkhorse.com/blog, you can find the link to download or to stream the playlist. In a few days, we'll also be posting it at fifthbeatle.com, and I also have written liner notes, which will give you a sense of why I chose those songs, because you might be surprised to find out it's not all Beatles songs, and nor is it just songs from the era. It's literally everyone from the Beatles to Billie Holiday to Bauhaus. So I love it. I know that again sounds self-serving, but I'm just a fan of those bands. So I think the album is just a fun album to listen to. So please, pick up the trade, but also check out our new album, which we're launching this weekend at New York Comic Con. So thank you so much for letting me talk your ear off about all the stuff I have going on. But
I got one last question for you in that case. And Fifth Beatle, can we ever see that on Broadway?
It is a great question. It's funny. When I first started working on the Fifth Beatle, I was mostly known as being a Broadway guy. And so you would think that would be the first place that I would gravitate towards. But I couldn't see it. I just didn't see it as a Broadway show. And I have to say, literally within the past month, and I can't drop names yet, but I've been approached by a creative team who does work on Broadway, who does very sort of progressive work on Broadway. And they pitched me a take that felt really right, and I was like, that's how you do it. So literally right now we are beginning to think about what it could look like on Broadway. So one day, but that being said, the focus really right now is on getting the trade paperback out there and getting the television show done. But I hope that Broadway will follow.
So the book is The Fifth Beatle, and if this didn't convince you to pick it up, I don't know what will. Vivek, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.